This is the Extra Mile.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Extra Mile. I'm Dr. Henry Jones, and I'm always here with my favorite co-host, the G5. Hey, George, how are you?
Not much, man. I'm doing good. But we are with our guest, our special guest, Luke Chandler.
Good morning.
Yes.
Hi, Luke.
Good
Thanks
morning.
for being here.
An early morning.
Let's pour the coffee.
Please.
If you're a first-time listener of the Extra Mile, we welcome you to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're not listening, start listening. And enjoy a cup with us. You already got your coffee. Is it already cold?
No, it's good.
Hey, good. Did you get coffee? I have my coffee. He's already coffeeed up. Well, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here, especially with caffeine.
Yes.
I think that's everybody's just like, we're so glad we have this. So we are definitely excited to talk about the things that you're passionate about. I mean, obviously, before the recording, Luke and I were figuring out that we're both musical enthusiasts, and that's fantastic. But essentially, even though I am an anthropologist and more of a fortune finder and a glory seeker, you're an actual archaeologist.
I've done a lot of that work, yeah.
That's fantastic. So what do you do professionally?
I'm actually a preacher with a church.
Okay.
I've been doing that for about 26 years, I think I counted the other day. But I got into archaeology. My master's is in ancient and classical history, just in the context of understanding the Bible, teaching the Bible. And then I've been involved in archaeology since 2009. And so it's developed into a big aspect of my life. It's changed the way I study and teach. And as when you encounter the past directly, not just reading about it, but you touch it and you feel it and you discover it, it's transformational.
That's awesome.
At least for me, it was.
Well, so in the roots of this, in the beginning of this, for me, I really think that sort of my interest in music really came from my faith and sort of a religious leaning. I sort of grew up in the church, and so that's sort of where my interest lay. And it's one of the reasons why I studied that in school. Is that similar for yourself?
Yes. I had an interest in music, and I learned to lead singing at a pretty early age. My father taught me,
Okay.
and it kind of grew from there. And so, similar story, I guess.
So you got a master's degree. Where did you go to college?
I went to Florida College,
Okay.
and then the University of South Florida to finish my undergrad,
Okay.
and then finished up in West Virginia.
West Virginia.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I haven't ever been over that far east.
No.
To West Virginia. No.
I haven't been to West Virginia either. So.
No, I'm more of a Texas boy. I went to a small liberal arts school, but it's interesting growing up and going to church, reading the Bible, and having this world that we constantly are reading whenever we're looking at the Bible. And I was always fascinated with history. I actually got a minor in history. But I was also reflecting, he was, for those of you who weren't here present with us in Lubbock, is that Luke gave a very fantastic talk with us over the weekend. And in reflecting on what you were talking about, doing digs in sort of what we call the Holy Land, or in Israel and Palestine, is to say you're looking for objects that haven't been touched by human hands or seen the light of day in millennia. And in my reflection of that, I have always been fascinated with things of music that are 200 years old, 300 years old. Even if you go back, well, what did music sound like in the time of David? And there is no way for us to recreate that.
Yeah.
I mean, unless we find a flute buried somewhere. But to say we can speculate, we can consider, we can invent sort of our own narratives. But unless there's some type of frieze or a carving or something that would illuminate that for us, it's really sort of lost to history. And yet, here you are, perhaps being inspired by these things and going over and unearthing these things. What made you start that? What sort of planted that seed in your mind of
For archaeology?
curiosity? Yeah, or even studying the Bible, or even looking at those things. Or
I like history, always have. I really got, I was raised in the faith, and so that was a big factor. But I just was fascinated. I had a Bible storybook when I was a kid, like the Bible in sort of comic book format.
Yeah.
And I read that thing over and over, and it put a visualization in my mind. And so that might be a root of it. And then in sixth grade, I found a book in my school library on World War II, and that got me hooked in history. And then in college, it turned really into ancient history. And I changed my major in college. I started as a communication major. I figured that'll help me preaching. And then after a couple of years, like, you know what? This is not, if I want to do something else with this degree, I don't want to be teaching speech classes. Nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing. But ancient history just grabbed me. I had a professor at South Florida who's an underwater archaeologist. In a Greek history class, and he's made a career. He's just retired from the classroom, but he's over right now in the Mediterranean. They go diving and pulling up battering rams from Greek vessels that were used in battles.
Amazing.
And it's fascinating, and that was one of the influences early on that geared me towards archaeology. Imagine being there and touching something like that. This was in this famous battle, and it's been sitting on the seafloor, and now I'm the next chapter, or the archaeologist is the next person in that object's history. And that's just fascinating, and it still fascinates me.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. I love the way that you say that, is that the objects have a history.
Yeah.
Some of the main critics for myself, being Indiana Jones, is that when I go and unearth these things and I make a movie about it so you can all see them and be inspired by it, that I'm not a very good archaeologist, am I?
No, I mean, you tend to destroy your sites pretty thoroughly. I mean, that people frown on that.
Dr. Jones.
Yeah, I mean, archaeology is destructive, but we destroy it in a very orderly, recorded manner. You knock statues into walls full of inscriptions, and I have an issue with that.
In my defense, the Nazis are bad people.
Well, that's fair enough. They destroy a lot of things, so that's fair.
Well, we can drop the ruse, obviously, but I think it's so fascinating because that's what gets people, at least in the entertainment world, interested in going and looking at objects from antiquity. From an aspect of faith, have you pursued it to have any type of mission other than curiosity? Like, are you trying to prove the Bible is right? Are you trying to prove the Bible is wrong? I know that some people have deep-seated missions, but is it just a sense of, wow, these things are over there and let's go unearth them and see what we can find? Or
yeah, as far as proving the Bible, that's not my purpose. I don't think my Bible needs proving. And in the end, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And archaeology is all about finding things you can see and touch. I look at archaeology as a valuable tool to understand the Bible better. Because even in small ways, things that we take for granted, how long is a cubit, or how much was a denarius, or those answers come from archaeology. And so we read the Bible, and what was going on at that time? What was when David made this decision, or Jesus or Paul went here instead of there. What was happening that might have been in their mind that influenced their decision? And archaeology helps us fill in those spaces and gives us a context and gives sometimes their motivations or their reasons, which makes them more relatable. And those people in the Bible, they're all about being relatable for people like us today. They inspire us, guide our choices, show us wisdom. How does it look to walk in the faith or to walk in the paths of God? And if we can understand why they did it or what was going on when they did it, we can relate, and that helps us today.
That's such a fantastic way to say that. I think that when it comes to saying that your Bible doesn't need proving, you've obviously have apologetics in mind, where you say, no, this is merely fact, and to then go and, I'm losing my thoughts here, but to say that these objects are there, and that the motivations behind these people and these stories, they were real people. They were written down as a history for us. When I look at things theatrically, and I know that you and I are speaking the same language, when we're talking about a musical or a play or some type of narrative where we would be play acting, one of our jobs as actors would be to find motivations of these characters. And that's always fascinated me reading the scriptures, to say, who were these people and why did they do this? And are they superheroes? Because they're superheroes of the faith to us, or at least it seems. Until some of the things that you said yesterday, which were really eye-opening, especially about Abraham. And I had considered, so Genesis 14, you were talking about how Abraham was just a lowly shepherd, except he wasn't. He was, and cool. The points that you made were fascinating, and I think perhaps even reiterating just a small snippet of that here would be great for the listeners, to say that we typically think of Abraham as just sort of rich shepherd man who was who had a large family and a very large lineage, an economic structure that followed him around. But he was actually pretty blessed, but he was also a real person of the place that he grew up.
I think understanding his story, I was talking about an artifact in the British Museum from the area where he grew up that shows soldiers, and they had military service that was obligatory back then as part of your obligation. So he probably had military experience, which equipped him to lead that rescue mission for Lot in Genesis 14. And one thing I've thought about with that, and even taught about once or twice, is a principle that the Lord uses people for his purposes, but he tends to use people who have equipped themselves in some way. He didn't send Peter to the Greek areas. He sent Paul, who grew up there and had the education to interact and understand the people. And Abraham went on the mission, but he probably had military experience from his background in Ur that helped him train the men. The Bible says they were trained men who went with him on the rescue mission, and he's probably the one who trained them, or at least supervised their training, and then apparently led the mission. And we want the Lord to use us. Are we equipped for anything? Do we equip ourselves? And maybe it's because we've chosen to. Sometimes maybe it's inadvertent, and we had no idea this might be useful in the kingdom someday. But archaeology helps us flesh out people like Abraham and see he's not a superhero. I mean, I can never relate to Superman, but not really even Batman. I mean, he has no powers, and neither do we, but I can relate. But, he's like a super mind. And so you still can't relate to it. But Abraham, he had military experience in his past probably, and he's a regular person, and he's a superhero, and yet archaeology can help us more easily see he's really like us. And God can use us potentially in the same way he used people like Abraham. And that brings things down to earth and puts me in the equation, at least in my mind's eye. Yeah, he can use me. He's not some mystical person who I could never imitate. He actually is someone whom I could walk in his same paths. And that changes the way I look at people in the Bible and the way they impact me. And archaeology is a big key to that, I think.
It makes me think about when Christ is talking about how the kingdom of God is like the ruler who gives his servants talents. Yeah. And to this person he gives many talents, and to this person he gives a couple talents, and this person he gives one. And the person with one talent went and buried it and brought it back. Here's your talent back. And he says, well, I'm going to take that and I'm going to give it to the one who has many talents, because the person who had many talents went and multiplied them. And perhaps what you're suggesting is that's us, is that we have to prepare ourselves with talents. We have to multiply our abilities because we have the ability to do so. And that in itself is something that God will then multiply us again. Yeah. He'll give us blessings on top of the blessings because we've worked hard for it, especially for the kingdom. It inspired me because you and I are relatively the same, and sort of I went to school to study history, to study music, and I did it primarily for the kingdom's sake. And then perhaps I forgot about that in times of my trying to make my way in the world, and to then come back and say, you know what, I am pretty thoroughly equipped to just sort of lead worship. I can teach, and I can preach, and I can do singing, and it's from that point it was just overcoming stage fright, which in a play I have no problem, but getting up in front of people and preaching, it's like I envy both of you for that ability to just get up there every week and do so and talk about the word. But it's fascinating to think about these people as someone who just started. I think of Gideon, Jerubbaal, where he was just someone and God called him. Same thing with Moses, is that it seems so fascinating when you read the scriptures how these fathers of the faith that did amazing things for the kingdom, that their first response to God actually talking to them and saying, you're going to go do this thing, is, you've got the wrong guy.
I wasn't expecting this.
Which I've always found that so fascinating. It's like, I'm sorry, that's God talking to you. How could you say that to him? But then it seems that that's what everybody's response is. It's like, I'm actually going to get on a boat and I'm going to go to Tarshish.
The other way, yeah.
Yeah, this is too much. And so, I don't know. I think that's so fascinating to think that you can still go over to this area and find objects. Mm-hmm. And unearth motivations and unearth evidence that these people were real.
Well, I think We're just reading words on a paper and reading the Bible. I think archaeology, like you've demonstrated this weekend, really helps take these people we read about, and we can sometimes even mystify and create different stories in our heads and determine what they look like, make them relatable. And that was like, oh yeah, we can really now relate to this person in a different way. Abraham was a good example. I liked your story of Elijah. I thought that one was pretty good too. Just giving that backstory and that knowledge helps me see his perspective and how he was kind of viewing things in that way, putting myself in his shoes, essentially.
Yeah, that's been the biggest unexpected impact. When I got into archaeology kind of accidentally. I had been teaching back in 2008 a class on archaeology in the Bible at church, like a lot of people teach. I didn't have any experience. I had a degree in history, but no, archaeology is more specialized. I didn't have anything particular, just stuff I read out of curiosity. But I was blogging a little bit back then, and there was a discovery in the New York Times about some inscription from around the time of David that was creating some buzz. And they couldn't get it all, but it had the word king and judge in the inscription. And it's around the time they're moving from judges to kings, which, okay, that's interesting. I just blogged about it and just summarized the story I'd read. Someone over there had a Google alert set up, saw my post, and sent a message to me inviting me to volunteer for the next season, just out of the blue. It was a Wednesday, and I was getting my class finished up for that night, and I saw this message come in, and I read it again, and asked my wife, honey, does this sound to you like what it sounds like to me? And, the cut to the end, she let me go over there for a 3-week experience. I'll try this. I've been to Israel once before, so just being in the land, wasn't as crazy. I was on a tour some years before that, but on a dig, this is a new way to experience it. And so I went there to try it once, and I came back home, and I'm like, how do I keep doing this? Because that 3 weeks was amazing. It's not just the experience digging and finding things, and being the new person to touch this thing that was last touched maybe by one of David's soldiers, for example. But every evening on a dig, there's a lecture program typically. 3 nights a week, the archaeologists have a free lecture each evening on the Bible and archaeology in some way from the archaeologists. And, wow. And so I did all those, and just the whole thing was so transformational. So how do I keep going back and doing this? And so I set up a company, and then started bringing people with me to the digs to help try to offset some of the cost. And then that kind of grew into other things too. But it's been a real blessing, and that benefit of making people relatable and fleshing out these stories that we just read on paper or something, it was a surprising effect. And I found myself reading the Bible much differently, and thinking about people much differently, and asking different questions. It trains your mind to think differently.
Well, that's a good point. How do you get other people to read the Bible in that way as well? Because I feel like, man, you must have like a supernatural ability to read the Bible with like a different perspective, a deeper insight than most people. Knowing all the history, knowing all the background, there can be that disconnect. How do you get just average people to have that same perspective and excitement to read the Bible?
I feel like I'm one of those average people. I don't know. It's just experiences shape you.
Yeah.
And they teach you to look at things differently. And I look at influences. There are people a lot smarter than me who ask questions and look at the text and point something out, even just in the more secular sense of archaeology. One thing that struck me is that Israelis, they're raised with the Bible because that's their history. Religion, it's like their history also. So there's not like a separation in their minds. The Bible is as much their history as we might study, the Revolutionary War over here or something like that. And even Israelis that aren't faithful or religious, they know the Bible very, very well. And they'll pick out names and details and just toss it around. They've heard it all their lives. And that's the first I've noticed it. And that taught me, okay, I need to start looking at this more carefully. And it just sort of rubs off. Some of these other people, some of whom I don't think are religious. And yet they, to me, almost have a supernatural ability.
Really?
To see the Bible in fresh ways. And you look at it I'm like, oh yeah, there it is. It's always been there. I just never paid attention to that detail or never thought to connect this to that.
Yeah.
And it just just being around that changes the way you look at it. And a lot of people who are a lot smarter than me, and I hope that as I kind of take that in my own way, that it rubs off on people to some degree also.
That's really cool.
There are people a lot smarter than me out there who have affected me. And so in a sense, you can say anyone I affect is due to these other people who put it in me first.
We're all encouraging everyone.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Okay. That's interesting.
You mentioned, you asked early on about the apologetic aspect, proving. And I've never liked to use the phrase proving the Bible, because I think of proof like you can demonstrate. You can't really demonstrate very much. But I do think that archaeology has great apologetic value in confirming or establishing certain things. We can never prove, because we can't go back and we can see David's name on an inscription, so these people believed he existed, but we can't go back and prove that he's the root of the Messiah, through archaeology. Yeah. That's a limit, but it does have value in establishing they did these things back then. These kinds of things the Bible talks about, we can find examples of it in the archaeological record, and so that maybe demonstrates, might be another word, confirms or illuminates certain practices or events or even people. And so there's that aspect of it also. There are a lot of benefits to archaeology, and I talked about that some yesterday. The first thing people usually think of is trying to attach, to confirm or demonstrate the Bible that it's true. It's the veracity of the Scriptures, and there is value in that. I believe there really is. I've seen there's a lot more than that, and I spend a lot more time, I guess, talking about those kinds of things in my series here. But there are a lot of my lessons I presented before have been sort of, the Bible talks about this, and we find it in archaeology, so we can trust the Bible. And so there is that aspect of things too. I'm not dismissing the connection to demonstrate the Bible's accuracy, because that's a big one, and that's a valuable one today with so many people criticizing the Bible in negative ways, just assuming the worst about it. And archaeology teaches us, no, don't assume the worst. There are reasons to trust. It knows what it's talking about in these other areas, so I can probably trust it, that it knows what it's talking about. It's remembering this accurately here too. I think there's great value there.
I thought your lectures were very refreshing, and some of the, and I was talking about this with other members as well, just one of the better lectures I've heard on archaeology and history, because it went from that standpoint. It came around to the avenue of look at even the small little details and how the Bible remembers these things, and we see this in archaeology. And it's not the big shiny stuff that we're all looking for. You had mentioned the Ark and different things like this. But it's the little things that really help pull the story up out of the pages that it's really enlightening and encouraging at the same time. That, man, if the Bible's accurate here, like you're saying, all the more confident I should be on what it's saying about, even the spiritual things and things like that.
Yeah, and it's boosted me in that way too.
Yeah.
Everyone, tends to go through periods where they question maybe aspects of their faith, or is this really what I've always thought it was? And I've gone through that, but archaeology has sort of helped sustain me in some ways. So
it was nice, because all you hear sometimes when you go online or you watch YouTube videos, you get in that YouTube portal, that YouTube hole, you're just like, there's just video after video of crazy things sometimes, and you're like, I don't know if this is true, I don't know if this is believable. Always on the bigger things, always on the shiny objects, and part of it is clickbait, because it wants you to click on those things. But you did a good job of just bringing the small things and making it just as impactful
Thank
too.
you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what is your thoughts on that? When you go online, when you do Google and YouTube these things, are you like, false?
I think you could simply be #go on a dig.
There's nothing that replaces that. What I've observed is that most of the video things we find online, whether YouTube or elsewhere, most of those videos are made by people who've not been on a dig and don't have any training or personal experience, and it changes the way you understand it. And people who have different backgrounds, and maybe it's in video engineering or storytelling or other kinds of things, and they're enthusiasts, and I respect that, because I've been one even before, but I had any experience or training in this, but I've learned sometimes the hard way that you can't replace experience in some kind of training. Because I've made embarrassing mistakes before, and I've looked back at things the way I used to teach something or the way I used to explain something before I got into digs. I look back now, I'm like, oh, I wouldn't say that now. But and most of the stuff out there is made by people who don't include that and haven't, for one reason or another, just haven't, I guess, had the opportunity or maybe the priority to equip themselves to talk about archaeology. And a lot of good things, but mistakes, honest, sincere mistakes, or just applying it in ways that really aren't the best way to apply it, making claims that maybe go beyond what the evidence says. And sometimes, one thing we talked about yesterday, jumping on to conclusions about things, claims about things that aren't valid, because there's a big market for people, a lot of money for people saying, hey, we discovered this, and it proves this about the Bible, and it really doesn't. But people jump onto it because it sounds, oh, I've always believed it, now it confirms it. So, yoo-hoo. And but that's not actually what it means. And people get, they jump onto things too quickly, and then later on, some of those things turn out to not be true. And it can make Christians look gullible and, a little bit desperate, to try to prove their faith, and maybe it makes them look insecure or just not grounded. And that's counterproductive.
I loved that second lecture where you were talking about that. I wanted to say amen many times. It's like I've seen that and I've experienced that. And people oftentimes, and maybe you can, and bring your insights onto this, but it seems like sometimes people will harness their faith and put it in the wrong things. Or it's just on history, or we even had lectures on science. It's just on science, and they see these things that might prove what you're talking about, might prove their faith, and they latch on in excitement because, I don't know, sometimes I feel like because they're almost unstable in their faith as it is now. But maybe I'm wrong. What do you think?
Yeah, there are probably some people like that. I think there are some that are very stable in their hearts, and they're just maybe tired of the constant attacks.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
And just see this as, something to push back. And when used properly, it can be something to, like, in a sense, defend or clarify and say, no, actually, this is true. This is reasonable. There are some fraudsters out there, too, who take advantage of insecure people or who are just looking for money. And there are a lot of sincere people who just, try it but don't have the experience yet to, there's always a gap in what we find and what we actually conclude about it. And, managing that gap, we're thousands of years later on the other side of the planet, and how do we know how to understand this stuff, fully? And, we're limited, and it's good to acknowledge that. Archaeology can help us close that gap, but using the archaeology wisely and judiciously. And someone claims, we found Noah's Ark, and and we trust this person or have no reason to distrust this person, and so say, yes, finally, these skeptics, there you go, back.
Who knew it was in Atlanta the whole time?
And then a lot of us, a lot of believers, we hear this is proven, they found this, oh great, and we don't think more about it. We just think, okay, that's done, check it off, and it turns out that claim can't be backed up, and maybe it's not even true, and we repeat it, or other people later on discover no, that's not quite what they say. Those Christians,
Yes.
And we don't want that to happen, because we want these things to fortify and strengthen and confirm and build our faith.
Yeah.
And it's easy to accidentally do things that can undermine it in some people. We don't want that. And so learning more about how it works and having a chance to maybe, hashtag join a dig, and not everyone can do that. But in one sense, anyone can do it. They don't limit that. They take volunteers from all walks of life and all ages. I've worked with people as young as 11 years old, 13 years old, and up with people in their 70s. I met one time this old Jewish lady from New York City who had been going to digs for 8 or 10 years in a row and is moving around different sites, and she loved it. And you're a volunteer over there. You pay for the privilege. You pay for your room and board and get yourself over there. But you're a volunteer, so they treat you well. You don't sleep in tents anymore. They have you in air-conditioned, Wi-Fi enabled, places where you can get a good night's rest. And they treat you. They break every 2 hours. They have coffee in the field, and they have breakfast and watermelon break and things like that. They treat you well, and they have that lecture program, and it's a great experience. And they don't abuse you. You're not slaves in Egypt. They don't have you out there making mud bricks like the Hebrews and gathering your own straw.
You're not like dig, dig.
I know. Yeah, they're not like the Nazis in Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's a whole different, better level than that. They treat you well. In one sense, anyone can do it. Now, realistically, not everyone can, has the time or the schedule to do it or the health, but a lot of people can, and they just don't realize it. And I was one of those. I used to think, it's just for archaeology majors, and it's not. I've worked with people. I worked with a ballet dancer one year. I worked with a professional French horn player from Germany one year.
Wow.
He just wanted to get outside and do something different. So he came on a dig in Israel. It's like, really? Of all the things. But he had an interest in archaeology anyway, so that's why he decided.
Well, how do people volunteer about these things?
Oh, well, I guess the easiest resource, there's a magazine called Biblical Archaeology Review. And I'd heard of it back in, it's been around since the early 70s. And it's like a big periodical about the Bible and archaeology. And it has a variety of perspectives in there. It's not all from, I guess you might call a more conservative or respectful opinion. It has all sorts of opinions. But it's all about archaeology in the Bible. And every January, they put an issue out. They put an issue every 2 months. So January, February issue is their Join a Dig issue every year. And one of the big things in there is a list of excavations in the Bible lands, most of them in Israel, and contact information, dates. And so if you want to do it, that's a resource to use. That's not what I used initially. Someone reached out to me. Yeah. But I've looked at it, and it's a great resource. And you can find it online. There's a website, the Biblical Archaeology Society. It's the parent company for the magazine. Wow. But if you just search Biblical Archaeology Review, Join a Dig, and it'll pull up something, and it gives you a whole list of places. And if someone wants to contact me, I've gotten to know some people over there, and some of those digs are maybe better for Bible believers than others, just because it's, some of those digs might not be looking at something in the biblical period. They might be looking at something that we call, post-interesting, like the Byzantines or the Crusaders, which, they're interesting, but, I tend to want to look at the biblical periods. And so if you find something, from the Crusaders or something, it's valid, but the joke out there, yes, it's post-interesting. So we'll treat it properly and record it and everything, but, it's the digs that
That's some junk from the 900s.
I know, it's only 1,200 years old. I don't have any use for that. But there are some digs that are more, centered in biblical periods or events, and that might connect more. And so someone can reach out to me, and I can help sort some of that. But you don't need me for that. That's probably the easiest resource right there. Yeah. So, but anyone can do it, and you can. They usually do it in the summer, because most of the archaeologists are professors, and that's their break. A lot of the volunteers are students, a lot of them from the U.S., and that's their break too. And some of them do it for credit, some of them don't. And the seasons range from maybe 2 or 3 weeks up to 5 or 6 weeks, and most people can just go for a part of that. My first year I went for 3 weeks, but the other seasons I've gone, the other 9 times, it's been for 2 weeks at a time, and that's plenty. Yeah, 2 weeks over there, you're involved in the process. You get a full cycle in of excavating and seeing what you find, and lecture program, and then you go back home. And most people, that's sufficient. A few lucky people could go for a whole season if they want to, but that's not most of us, and that's fine. Yeah. But it's an opportunity that's literally available for almost anyone.
I think this is a good time to show this here. Let's look at this. You found some scraps, right?
Yes.
Scraps. That's how you mentioned it yesterday. Yeah. I don't think they're actually scraps. I think they're actually wonderful.
Most of what we find
they're
is
really
scraps.
Cool. Yeah. Well, yeah. Scraps. It's an interesting word and a way to describe it, because it's just like. Because when we think about it in our culture today, when we think of scraps, they're just the things that we throw away, the things that we don't really care about too much. And yet we look at history and we dig up these things, and at least for me, I care about these things. I care about them deeply. It's like, oh, wow, these are really, really cool. And I think that someone made these and put the time and effort into these is really neat. What did you find here?
Okay, I'll start with one I did find, help find. This is a pottery piece from what we call the early bronze period, and it's before Abraham. Abraham is in the period we call Middle Bronze, and don't need to go on all that now, but this came out of the ground, and it was pre-interesting.
Pre-interesting.
Yes.
Oh no.
Yeah, we were looking in the late bronze, which is the Judges period, and the early iron, which is like Saul and David. That was our research focus. And this one came out of the ground, and oh wow, what's that doing? In these levels, and maybe we dug a little deeply. Maybe someone else had been digging their house thousands of years ago, and they found it and just tossed it aside, so they put it in a different level.
Wow.
And so we pulled it out, looked at it, and they were just going to stick it back at the site. We don't have any use for it. So pottery we dig up and don't have any further use for. Once we look at it, they just bury it back at the site somewhere. And so I'm like, well, I'm going to take this home because it's not a complete piece. If it's like a complete jar or a diagnostic piece, you can't take that out of the country. But something like this, they don't care. And this is part of a big storage jar.
That's incredible.
I know. This was part of a big vessel of some kind that was made and used and then buried and forgotten before Abraham showed up. So when Abraham's in Canaan, this piece is already buried in the ground and forgotten. And then the next person who found it was, us in 2019. I think that was the year we found this. And I took it home. So I'm the next chapter in this object's history. And the neat thing I like about it, besides that you can just touch it, is if you look closely, there are some lines. When he was making it, there was a tool to put little grooves, all the way around, and some decoration, and you can see some of that. So you can imagine if someone chose to put that there. Mm-hmm. And then above that, there's a little smudge, and you have to look closely to get it. And I photographed this at home with a tripod to get it. They're in my files somewhere. There's a little finger smudge when he was making it.
Oh, wow.
And so the potter, just a 1-second mistake, oops, forget that. He just left it, didn't fix it, because why bother? This is just some functional jar. And so he baked it this way, he fired it, and today we can still see that 1-second mistake preserved forever. And you can put your finger there where his finger was, and it just takes you back in a way. And stuff like this, in one sense, you kind of come down the first time you find something, from the past on a dig, oh, my first discovery. This is my first slingstone, my first piece of pottery. After a week, you're like, okay, more pottery, but
yeah, precisely.
Yeah, yeah.
There's another pottery.
I know. Oh boy, another broken jar. But in one sense, though, when you let yourself just settle down, the awe never disappears because you just sit back and let yourself reflect, and this has a history. And the person who was part of this object's history, who knows what that person was involved with or what they did. A lot of my work, the first 5 seasons, we worked in a site that was built around the time of David and Saul. It's a border fortress that overlooks David and Goliath's battlefield called Hebek Kaiafa. And we don't know the actual name of it. It's proposed. A biblical name has been proposed, but we really can't be sure. Sha'araim. It's mentioned in 1 Samuel 17, the David and Goliath story. But it might have been in a different location. Anyway, maybe not. But everything there dates to the time of David, basically. And that border fort probably was built by David's government to mark the border with the Philistines.
Wow. And
it's over the valley where David and Goliath fought the border. And I just constantly wondered, the 5 years I was there, you find something. Was this object owned by someone who served under David? Mm-hmm. And maybe he spoke with David at some point. Maybe he knew David a little bit. And at the very least, maybe he heard David speak. And just, wow, the person who heard David's actual voice and maybe even, met him or knew him, this was his, and now I'm touching it. Mm-hmm. And, just in your own mind, there's that shock and awe factor still that never really goes away. If you let it, which just, that's not really a scientific or apologetic value, but it's just a personal value and a personal experience that you really can't replicate in other parts of life. And seeing something like this, there's not a David connection. This is pre-Abraham, but still, maybe the person who made this, maybe his grandson talked to Abraham at some point. You're speculating, but just to imagine that. And
it creates a wonderful story, and we love as humans stories.
Yes.
That's obviously their technology from that time. This is our iPhone, which that's a stretch, but to say something that was functional to say this is how they lived. They stored water in this. They stored some type of liquid, maybe oil, whatever it was. It was a functional thing. This is their Tupperware.
Yes, it's their Tupperware, it's their dinnerware, it's their pantry, their kitchen cabinets. Sometimes we even find vessels, they put weapons inside of them, like to store them. And that seems a little odd, but sometimes you find like a few knives inside a jar. It's like, okay, whatever.
Wow.
Maybe it's your lockbox, so to speak.
How are these objects preserved? Sorry, George, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's fine. Go
How
ahead.
are these objects preserved? And I mean, we're going way back to sort of why are these things buried?
Yeah, they usually get buried because someone either throws them out, they get broken and damaged, they just throw them into a pit, like a trash pit. And when we find a trash pit, that's like a treasure trove because you find all sorts of stuff in there. Wow. You learn about their lives. Sometimes it's because their settlement, their home, their city was destroyed. And we also get excited about destruction layers in archaeology. Someone came and destroyed the whole town and maybe it burned down. And then someone came along later, brought in dirt, leveled everything, and just built on top a new settlement. And, that was a tragic human story. But from an archaeological perspective, it's like, yes, a destruction layer.
Yes.
Because all this stuff is just trapped there. And they usually buried stuff, the remains of the destroyed thing, to build on top. And so you find everything that fell on the floor, broken pottery, weapons, if they had ancient glass, or et cetera, et cetera. You go there and you go down to the floor level and you find all the good stuff. And it's been sitting there preserved and buried for millennia sometimes. And the site where I worked for 5 years was especially good because one problem is when someone rebuilds, sometimes they dig down and disturb the previous layers to build their foundations for the new buildings or stuff like that. And so things are often churned up. They'll find the remains of old buildings and recycle the stones, recycle the material. So I go out and cut stone. Here's some cut stone. I'll just dismantle this ancient structure and fix my house
And that's
up.
where you find a piece of pottery that, that's garbage.
Yeah.
So that's why layers can be mixed, perhaps.
Yes. And so the first site I was at had the benefit, when it was destroyed, no one built there again for 700 years for some reason. And so that perfectly preserved layer, and when they rebuilt, they only rebuilt on part of the site. So a lot of the site from the time of David, you dig below the surface, and the first thing you find is 3,000 years ago, undisturbed, and that's rare. You go to Jerusalem, that place has been destroyed and rebuilt so many times, and it has steep slopes and stuff washes down. It's hard, and a lot of it's holy ground today, and you can't dig. So it's hard to find stuff in Jerusalem sometimes. It's a difficult place to excavate. But out in other places away from Jerusalem, you can find, it's joyous almost. And we had this very perfectly preserved, pristine layer from the time of David, and that's rare. And so it let us fill in a lot of gaps, and just stuff preserved that we normally don't find. And so that was very nice. Now this one I did not find. I bought it in a licensed shop, and you have to be careful. There's a big market in fake antiquities. So this is from the time of Abraham. That actually dates to last February or something. So be careful where you buy things. But this one was recommended by a scholar to me, and it was a licensed shop. It was known and established. And this is an oil lamp from the time of Jesus, and it's intact. And bigger vessels often we find broken. Smaller things, there's a better chance because it's just, it's a little more durable. Being small somehow, it's not as easy to break or doesn't just randomly get as broken. And this is a typical oil lamp from the 1st century, plus or minus. And they call this style a Herodian lamp after Herod.
Okay.
It's just the name of a style, like fashion. Pottery's like fashion. And, we have bell bottoms or parachute pants, and we can date ourselves by those things or date people by what they're wearing. And pottery is one of the best way to date a site because pottery's like fashion. The way it's made, the shape it has, is it painted? If so, how is it painted? And things go in and out of fashion, and someone who's had some training can look at pottery as it's coming out, and usually within a few seconds, get within a couple centuries of the time period. And so it's very handy, and this is typical of the 1st century. Wow. If you dig and you find this style of lamp, you're talking 1st century BC AD. And they're all this size. And you put the olive oil in here and put a wick coming out here, usually flax in ancient times, and there's your lamp. And this won't last a whole long time, but this is the typical size. They don't typically come bigger than this.
That's your cell phone light right there.
Yes. And so, if you want to upgrade your battery, you have to get a bigger lamp. They don't have them, so this is your battery life right here. And so when Jesus tells parables like the 10 virgins who went to the all-night party, didn't bring any extra oil for their lamps, this is the lamp he's talking about.
Oh, I didn't mean for you to hand that to me.
No,
I was gesturing.
take it. Oh, I saw that. I like to pass these
That's
things
terrifying. So that's not very much oil that you can put in that, obviously.
No.
Wow.
But it helps us see things through the eyes of the original audience. When Jesus was saying his parable, telling his parable, what do we think of? What do we picture? What kind of lamps? And we probably picture things that are bigger. And but
That's amazing.
if we want to go back and get the original perspectives and teachings of the Bible, how did they look at it? How did they hear these things? And what did they think of when they heard these words for the first time? And something like this, when Jesus talks about lamps or anyone talks about a lamp, this is what they were thinking of. And so now we've taken ourselves back. We're seeing it from their perspective. We're getting the original perspective on it. And that's a great benefit because we want to understand the Bible in its original context. And things like this help us with that.
For them to say, they didn't bring any extra oil, and the audience would say, what? Why wouldn't they bring
Why
any
wouldn't they
extra
bring it?
oil?
Exactly. Why would you do that? And so Jesus is
That makes
saying
a
to
lot
be
of sense.
prepared for the kingdom. Why would you not do that? And
Precisely.
it emphasizes his point and kind of restores it for us, I think.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I just read that real quick. It says, at that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of the virgins were foolish, and 5 were wise. And when the foolish ones took their lamps, they did not take extra olive oil. Right? And that's that right there. Wow.
You could barely
With
walk down
them.
the street without extra olive oil with that thing.
I know.
But the wise ones took flasks of oil and oil with their lamps, of olive oil with their lamps. Wow. That's so interesting, yeah. So the wise ones saw that and was like, that's not enough. I'm going to need to bring some extra stuff.
A parallel would be you're going to go outside all night. You didn't bring your cell phone charger.
Yeah. Yeah, if your battery life clearly won't last this long and you just, I don't need my charger or just don't think to, that's a big fail.
Yeah.
And something like this just helps us, and we see it from the original perspective. And a lot of us, we're originalists with the Bible. We want to get the original teachings, the original perspective, see it the way they did,
Yes.
and
Right.
bridge this gap of space and time. We're not looking at it as 21st century North Americans. We want to see it as first century or whatever century for the biblical period. People who hear these things or think these things, and archaeology helps us do that.
I'm so fascinated.
what a tool.
I want more of that. Do you have any more resources that you could provide for me or for the listener?
There are some good websites out there. There are some that are not good, but there are a few. One of my favorite places to go for just archaeological updates or news, it's BiblePlaces.com. And if you go to that site, BiblePlaces.com, it's actually a photo site. The guy, his name is Dr. Todd Bolin, and he's a professor, but his big thing is photos of the Bible lens. He lived and taught in Israel for like 10 years, I think, and took his camera with him everywhere. And he has these great collections that I use all the time that you can use in teaching, and they have notes and the PowerPoint slides that explain what you're looking at, and it's solid stuff.
That's nice.
He's respectful of the Bible. He looks at it very much the same way I do, and I think you would too. But he has a blog, Bible Places blog. Almost every weekend, he provides an update on archaeological news and announcements, and it's pretty trustworthy. I mean, he takes a very respectful, conservative view of the Scripture, and I've learned it's someone I can trust. And it's a great resource. Anyone can look at it. Bible Places blog, and it's searchable. And he most of it's these weekend updates, but sometimes he has other things. If there's an announcement that's biblically relevant in some way, he might put it up there and offer some commentary that helps us get an idea of how maybe we should think about it. Is this trustworthy? Is this kind of sketchy? And it's a great resource.
Fantastic.
You want to finish this off with their question?
Oh, yeah. We always ask our guests.
Okay.
In Matthew 7, Jesus' instruction during the Sermon on the Mount is pretty radical teaching, and I always introduce it that way because it is. He always instructs his people, or always. He's saying, think about life in a new way. In the Roman times, as you probably know, it was customary for a Roman soldier. They had the right to make anyone carry a burden for them for the distance of a mile. And so Jesus' instruction is, if someone makes you go a mile with them, go with them too. And if someone slaps you on the cheek, turn the other cheek to them. If someone sues you for your shirt, give them your coat. And so it's a radical way of inspiring people to look at the Christian life, to say, these people are different because they don't act like everybody else. And so that's really the namesake of the podcast, the extra mile. In your experience, in your life, in archaeology, say, whatever lens you'd like to answer, how would you instruct the listener to go the extra mile in their life from your experience and your own wisdom?
Well, I think that aspect of being a servant to others and love your neighbor as you would yourself, that's really an extension of that root command that Jesus says is one of the greatest commandments. And even, love your enemies, those who would force you into the situation. Talk about shock and awe. You surprise them with unexpected responses, and it catches the attention of some people. It's about being a servant to others, putting others before self. And Jesus did all that to an extreme degree, and just, I guess, helping to guide us to think that way and to even adopt that mindset. It is radical. You mentioned that. And people who naturally would resent being imposed on like that, how would they hear that? Offensive. We're looking for the kingdom that's going to push back on these Romans and others who impose on us and violate our rights and violate our freedoms. And Jesus gives a very different perspective on it as servants of his, as kingdom servants. We don't react and respond the way people want to. We train ourselves to think differently. Boy, I feel like I'm kind of rambling, but that is so much at the root of Christianity that separates it from others. I know we mentioned archaeology. As impactful to me as anything we've discovered or where we've been is the people on a dig. And you're not finding incredible things every single moment of the day. And so you have a lot of time when you're working, taking dirt out, just talking with the people there. And people tend to be interesting in good ways on digs.
Mm-hmm.
People who would choose to take that sort of an adventure and experience, they tend to be interesting people who have interesting lives, and you like talking with them. But many of them are not Christians or have no interest in it. Not everyone out there digging at a biblical site is religious even. And even some that would claim to be religious, don't show that in their lives, like is always the case. But even out there, you connect with people, and you rub off on people, and they rub off on you. And to bring that out there, putting others before self, and giving up your rights and your privileges and your freedoms, or not freedoms, but just your sense of, I'm not doing that, or here are my barriers and my boundaries. There are healthy boundaries on some things, but it shocks and surprises people when they actually live that. Mm-hmm. And as much as people have influenced me on like a dig, I hope that my contribution on a dig or anywhere else is to influence them. And it's maybe not in the ways I think of, maybe not some well-worded phrase that stays with them for life. Maybe it's just seeing me do something, and even when I'm tired or just ready to take a break or I've done my bit, stepping in and helping someone with their burden or doing it for them makes a more lasting impact. And we've been reading that passage for many, many years, and yet we still struggle with it. You ask that question regularly?
To all of our guests.
Okay. It's always fertile ground. And who has the perfect answer for it?
I think that's the point is the more people we ask that question and get a perspective, the closer we could perhaps get to an answer. It's almost like a limit. As the limit approaches the truth, everybody has something to contribute to that statement. Yeah. I think that's amazing that you brought it to the people, and that I know we sort of sprung that on you, but the idea being that archaeology and indeed the world is about people interaction, and that to not only connect with your neighbor who's flesh and blood and breathing the same air as you, and to show them kindness and to show them the things that Jesus is trying to teach, but then also to reach back into history, into antiquity, things for millennia ago, they were the same. And they were also trying to reach to their people who were still alive and to say, when these things happen to you, behave this way. And that's how you can snatch people out of the fire. That's how you can be a fisher of men. and pluck these people from eternal damnation. So thank you for coming, and thank you for inspiring me and being a guest on our podcast. We had, what did you show me earlier that we wanted to? We're not going to talk about that. Anyway, we can put your website up on the description, and we can definitely bring people to an email, perhaps, if they wanted to contact you, if that would be fine, and to bring people closer to God, hopefully. And so thanks for being our guest.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you. It was great. All right. Go so. If you want to know more about the Bible or you have any questions, our email is in the description below. You can DM us. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're looking for a church family or you're in the Lubbock area, we invite you to come visit and hang out with us in Milwaukee. We love for you to find a church who practices the love of Christ.